Think of family wealth like a landscape shaped over time. Paths are laid down early, boundaries are set with good intentions, and years later, people often discover that what they once felt was sensible now needs more care. Small decisions made quietly decades ago can have lasting effects. Trusts sit within this reality, but they are frequently misunderstood. Seen as technical, distant, or only for certain families, in practice they exist for a simple reason: to bring clarity and continuity to assets that are meant to outlast individual lives. What's at stake isn't complexity for its own sake, but control, protection, and fairness as circumstances change. In this episode, we are joined by Ian Cook, financial planner at Quilter Cheviot, who will help us explore what trusts really do, why they exist, and how families can actually use them. Hi, Ian. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Neil. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. There's obviously quite a lot of language around trusts and a lot of complexity, it seems, from the outside. When you strip away the legal language, how do you usually explain what a trust is and the role it plays for a family?
Yeah, so it's very specific and it depends on the individual that I'm speaking with. But in simple terms, what a trust gives us is the ability to control assets. In law, it's considered its own entity. So how I'm generally explaining it to clients is something that can be set up so that you can perhaps still have access to your monies in the future, or for a specific purpose, such as looking after someone who's maybe not got the ability to look after themselves in the future. And in wider ranging circumstances, I'm using the trust as a vehicle to allow to potentially mitigate inheritance tax.
Right, okie doke. And I think you've started to touch on it there, but in sort of day-to-day layman's terms, what kind of uncertainties or pressures would tend to lead to a family considering using a trust?
Yeah, as someone tends to get a little bit older, they might want to put monies into trust to allow someone else to have control, because they may lose capacity in the future. So having monies that are set aside in trust with someone that is able to manage that monies on their behalf is really, really useful. Also, as well, lots of people want to pass on money to the next generation, but perhaps the next generation might be minors, or they might not be considered financially proficient at the moment to be able to look after or take control of that money themselves. So it allows the parent, grandparent, or what we call the donor, i.e. the person that's giving that money to the next generation, gives them the ability to control that money. And in some cases, that also goes beyond the grave.
Right, okie doke. And in terms of when people bring themselves to trusts, what sort of assumptions do they often bring that don't actually match how they work in practice?
Yeah, great question. So what actually happens, a lot of people have got a preconceived idea that trusts can be expensive. There clearly is a cost with a trust, and it really depends on the individual nature and how that trust is set up. But often the biggest barrier that I find is people are concerned about what the cost of it might be. But often what happens is when you sit through it and you kind of do a cost comparison to the benefits versus what the costs are, the benefits usually far outweigh what the costs are. And in these modern times, if you're using a financial advisor or financial professional, often the cost is not grossly dissimilar to other products that you may already own within your suite or portfolio already.
Right, okie doke. And how do trusts actually help families balance the control and flexibility as circumstances change across those generations?
Yeah. So there's essentially, I'll just talk about two different types of trust today. So there's what's known as a bare trust or a discretionary trust. Bare trust, in simple terms, you are making a gift. It can be a consideration of cash or assets into trust. In our world, we normally look at cash and investments. So those monies that go into the bare trust are for one or a group of specific individuals that cannot be changed. And once those monies are placed into that type of trust, once the person reaches age 18, then they have unlimited access to that money. So the control in a bare trust lasts literally until the person is 18 years old. And then after the age of 18, they have no flexibility, or the donor has no flexibility after that. So the usual type of trust that we use would be something called a discretionary trust. And there's other rules and regulations which we won't talk about today. But what a discretionary trust does is it allows the donor to have power over how those monies are distributed and when. Also, the people that are named on that trust as the beneficiaries can be changed. So
Right.
you could name a child or a grandchild or even a friend, and if the circumstances dictate that you want to change that person and nominate somebody else or withdraw that benefit in a discretionary trust, you're at liberty to do that.
Right, okie doke. So when families first start thinking about trusts then, what's the very sort of first piece of groundwork that they need to do before sort of structure, tax, or the legal detail even comes into play?
Yeah, I would say the first thing that someone needs to do is you need to identify the professional person that you want to use who's going to potentially set up the trusts for you.
Mm-hmm.
It can be, often I find with my clients that I use trust with, it's a process over sometimes a number of months or even years as I'm beginning to educate the client on what is required, and how the trust actually fits into their individual circumstances. So first and foremost, the most key thing is to find someone who's qualified, who you can have a good relationship with. Often with trusts, you probably want an ongoing relationship depending on the type of trust that you're setting up with. So
Mm-hmm.
you need to be comfortable with either the financial or legal organization with which you're going to place your monies with. That's the absolute key. And really, I'd say the most important thing is to educate yourself on what they are. Trusts have become a little bit more complex. There's a little bit more regulation around them now. So trusts, you need to think about the people that you'd want to be involved in the trust. So the person that's gifting the money can be a trustee, but also you need to think of other people who you can trust that would also act as trustees. So in the event that you were not here, they would hopefully act as if they were you. So it's
Right.
important that you have that network around you. But the first and foremost, educate yourself on what a trust is and what it means potentially to you and your situation.
Right, makes sense. And if there's sort of clients or families out there who, haven't even considered a trust or anything like this structure before, are there sort of one or two questions that you would say you could ask yourself to think about whether investigating a trust or this route would be for you?
Yeah, okay. So let's give a specific example. So let's give some context around that. So often a conversation I have with my clients, typically in our world, they might be interested in potentially mitigating inheritance tax.
Mm-hmm.
So trusts would be one of the obvious routes to use alongside protection and other things. However, the first question that I ask the individuals is, would you be comfortable actually giving the money away? So trusts are great. They're really fabulous products, but you need to ask yourself whether it would be appropriate. So as a financial planner, that's the kind of questioning that I'm going through. So if you've got a sum of money that you potentially want to put in trust for your son or your daughter or your grandchild, are they in a capable position to be actually able to receive the monies now? And would it be better served with them receiving the monies now potentially? So those are the type of questions that you've got to ask yourself. The other type of questions you need to think about are you prepared for potentially a long-term relationship with either a legal or financial institution, or do you want a one-stop shop to potentially set something up or take a piece of advice and move on? Often what will happen is the financial professional that you're involved with at the level of trust will work out whether it's an appropriate product for clients, because many times people have come to me thinking that they want to trust, but actually there's an even more simple solution. So they
Right.
tend to be good for larger sums of money. If it's £5,000 and £10,000 or the the low 10,000s, then really maybe a gift or even doing something through a bank or building society, because they have those sorts of trusts available. That's probably a more likely route. Larger sums of money though, absolutely financial professional or legal professional to take advice.
Right. So it sounds like you're saying if there's a big chunk of money and you're looking to leave it on to somebody else and a trust might be right for you, find the right professional, engage with them, have that conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And really, trust is not trust is not a one-stop shop. A trust is part of a wider ranging financial plan.
Mm.
So it's part of the building blocks of, you think if you build a house, trust would be the bricks, something else would be the windows, something else would be the door, something else would
Yeah.
be the roof. They're very, very rarely used independently for all of a person's wealth because they can be restrictive. The one thing I would say is there is a myriad of trusts that are available that all do varying different things. The more tax and inheritance tax efficient that you want the trust to be, usually the less control that you've got for yourself,
Right.
i.e., to enable you to have access to your own money. So it's like a sliding scale that moves across in terms of the simplest trusts are the ones that are they're the most effective, but you kind of don't really have any control. I.e., you're giving the money away essentially into a bare trust, so you're giving up all rights to that capital. Whereas the more complex trusts, they're less tax efficient, but what they do is give you a lot more control over what can happen in the future.
Right. Makes sense. Lovely. Ian, brilliant. Thank you. That's been a really interesting introduction to the trust arena. Thanks a lot for your time.
Thank you, Neil.